What's the good word, Josh? Your boy DKB here. So let's talk about Bryce Huff. We have our bye week right now, and this would be a perfect time for Joe Douglas to be able to really sit down and hammer out a contract extension with Bryce Huff, where, week after week, seeing how Bryce Huff is flashing, and I won't even say flashing, seeing how he's shining bright out there on the field. That price number for the contract only seems like it's going to continue to rise. Now, there is a point where I think we need to temper some expectations, and we'll talk about why, but he has a lot going for him, right? You have recently J.J. Watt, former All-Pro, looked like one of the most legendary, edge defenders out there. He spoke about Bryce Huff, and, it's surprising enough because I want to say every New York Jets fan knows what we have in Bryce Huff, but everybody outside of that spectrum, the NFL world is wide, especially considering how we performed in primetime games prior to this year. It's been pretty atrocious, and so there wasn't really going, even in a bigger marketplace, there wasn't going to be a huge mass of people that would know what Bryce Huff is outside of the New York Jets themselves, and of course some opponents we face. But even with that said, Joe Douglas has been turning down offers for the last 2 years. So obviously there's interest that's out there. I'm sure Bryce Huff can feed into that during the contract negotiations as well. But having a guy like J.J. Watt in your corner definitely helps out, considering some of the interesting stuff we heard as well about Quincy Williams' contract situation, comparisons that are made, floor versus ceiling prospects, all that kind of stuff. Bryce Huff is a little bit in a sphere of his own with what he's done in so few snaps. So, just touching on what J.J. Watt has to say, he said that he loves Bryce Huff. There's a lot of names on that defense. There's a lot of guys that can there's a lot of guys that can play a lot of great football. I think Bryce Huff coming off the edge, he's got some great pass rush moves. He's got some incredible technical skills. That's a guy that's been getting back there, making a lot of things happen, and maybe not getting as much time as he deserves comparative to the rest of the guys. And that's the point that everybody else has been making for quite some time, right? You have guys like Will McDonald that recently got drafted. You have Jermaine Johnson. You have guys like Carl Lawson that are underperforming a little bit ahead of somebody like a Bryce Huff. And with him being your most important pass rushing weapon statistically as well as film-wise, you would imagine they find a way to get him on more. And, Robert Saleh did credit that as much, paraphrasing here, basically saying that Bryce Huff has forced his way onto the field in those early first and second downs where the New York Jets were really against trying to put him out there on the field. And we heard Jeff Ulbrich mention, when they originally brought him in, really only looking at him as a third down specialist. That school of thought has really started to change, and we're seeing the additional, ample opportunities that he's getting to really back up the coaching staff evolving and, growing his role within his defense. So keep in mind, it shocked me for a little bit, and then I had to snap back into reality, right? We're talking former undrafted free agent here, and not one of those, like star players in the draft that fell because of some concerns or anything. Just a guy that legitimately was flying under the radar, right? People didn't respect the run ability he'd have in the NFL. And then you take a look at the pass rushing department. Nobody really predicted the level of dominance that we're seeing right now, but they did recognize some level of pass rushing technique and ability. So at the young age of 25, you're talking about being able to lock up an elite pass rushing superstar for the next 3 to 5 years on a very, very cheap contract, considering what, he could go for or a year or two out down the line. This $4.3 million for the second round tender he's playing on right now, it's going to look like a huge bargain compared to the contract extension he gets, assuming that we make that happen, right? And so you take a look statistically, which a lot of what this contract situation is going to be catered around, and it speaks for itself, right? He's coming off of multiple games this year with career highs, in 8 pressures. You talk about recency bias. With him specifically and the impact that he's had, you take a look at some of the names: Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson. In general, aging and young talent that have been at the top peer of the quarterback ranks for, the last 5 to 10 plus years now. With Bryce Huff on the field, they've gone for a combined, and this is when he's getting pressure, but they've gone for a combined 6 of 15 passes for 20 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. They have an 8.3 passer rating, which is ridiculous. And they've gotten sacked a collective 4 times. So, he's what we imagine Jermaine Johnson to be, ideally full package on that, is realistically what we're getting right now out of Bryce Huff. He is a quarterback killer. You talk about having your version of a Micah Parsons, and we have that in Bryce Huff here. It's just specifically catered to his ability to go out there and rush the pass, which I respect. Even if he offered absolutely nothing in the run department, this is a guy that 31 other teams are going to go out there and kill for to have on their roster, and they're still going to give him that opportunity on the first and second down just to see him be able to go out there and tear the quarterback's heads off the moment they decide not to run the ball. So, you get into some of the other stats. He's playing literally half as many snaps as most of the guys ranking in the top 10 in most of the elite, major pass rushing categories. Right now, Bryce Huff is 4th in pressures, but he leads the NFL the last 3 weeks in pressures. He does a lot of his damage on 3rd and 4th down, which is what you're going to pay your pass rushing specialist for. He leads the NFL with 20 pressures on those downs. He's the only player in the last 2 years to have a pressure rate over 22%. He's leading the league there with the 25.7% pass pressure rating, right? Quarterback pressure rating, however you want to go about it. Needless to say, basically, a quarter of the plays he's on the field is going to cause some kind of disruption out there to the quarterback, which is pretty significant. Take 60 to 70 snaps per game for an offense. You're talking 20 of those plays are essentially going to have problems with them, and that's due to one guy in Bryce Huff, which is amazing to have on our side, right? Let alone all of the other players that he's making look even better than what they are, with what teams are going to have to do to figure out where he's at on the field and how to combat him. So when we want to talk about contracts with a guy like Bryce Huff, right? We talked about Joe Douglas declining offers for the last 2 years, and I think this makes sense, right? You wanted a little bit more proven consistency when it comes to production and maybe what you're seeing statistically on film with him. I have no problems with that. But I think that does point to the obvious conclusion that Joe Douglas wants to extend this guy. Probably was waiting for the sign off on the coaching staff to say this is a guy we definitely need long term. And so now we're getting it done. What is that going to look like, right? We've had more primetime games this season. That's more general buzz for a guy like Bryce Huff to garner, and voice of the fans speaking up, and you have J.J. Watt and all, JFM in the building, all these other guys in his corner. Reasonably what you could look at, and it's a very interesting situation because he's only had 675 snaps, give or take, in the last 3 years. That's less than a full year's worth of a starting edge rusher's pass rush opportunities, right? You're talking about anywhere between 800 to maybe 1,100 on the highest end in general for a starting edge rusher, which that'll never happen in our defensive line rotation anyways, but still pretty concerning when you want to talk about numbers here, right? Ideally, I think you can narrow this down to the range of 3 to 4 years, $40 to $52 million, right? I really think this could look very similar to what John Franklin Myers ended up getting. And again, we have this 2 weeks for Joe Douglas to not have to worry about a ton of other things. Obviously, the trade deadline is out there. We've seen him working the phones with the Mecole Hardman deal. Maybe something with Carl Lawson will be coming up. But you have 2 weeks here to really be able to sit down with the player, nail out the finer details, and get this thing done before the Week 8 trade deadline. And then you're pretty much set till you get to the offseason and not really having to worry about a ton of moves. 3 years, 3 to 4 years, $40 to $52 million. You can't really compare him to the players like Max Crosby and all those other guys because, again, they've been playing so many more reps than a guy like Bryce Huff. But even then, you can consider him being a steal in that range if that's ultimately what he ends up getting. I'd be surprised if he gets 5 years, but that's kind of where I'm at with it. I really do think we'll hear something pretty soon regarding his contract. these are the numbers that I think fall in line with what you're seeing from other young edge rushers that have received contract extensions around year 25 for them. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are in general, right? Bryce Huff, the good, the bad, if you have the bad, why you would be concerned about giving him a contract extension, and then of course what kind of contract you may give him, or if you love kind of the numbers that I floated out here for you guys today. And I'll catch you again. Peace.